I guess let's begin with the big disappointment that came bundled with this. I mean, it's great that House of Wolves is not only finally getting its release, and we have a date and we have something to look forward to, but shortly thereafter came the news that there is no raid, and that is disappointing with a capital D. I just want to make sure that that's emphasized.
So I did a double take. I just was like, what?
Before we get into
to make more sense.
Before we get into it, let's read Bungie's statement. House of Wolves will not have a raid activity. We didn't make this decision lightly. Our team has been humbled by the reception of raids in Destiny, and we are creating a new raid for a release later this year.
And the important part,
they mentioned that there's a new cooperative activity, end-game activity focused on variety. Clearly, they're setting up the disappointment to then say, but we've got this thing that is hopefully cool.
Prison of Elders.
I didn't want to include that in the statement because that stuff we'll talk about later.
Well, I know. We
are.
But the point is,
like, oh, it's cool though. We have some other stuff.
No, of course,
doing damage.
But we're in the business of seeing through the damage control, and of course, positioning that to our audience. So we do want to say, this is something we're going to talk about in a second. However, the fact that there isn't a raid included is extremely disappointing. And I know you and I did a conversation video where we did discuss it. I don't think the disappointment came across, so I want to make sure that it's absolutely out in front right now. We are disappointed about this. However, I don't think that House of Wolves is necessarily in a whole lot of trouble without it. I think the bigger question for Bungie is, are they charging for that raid extra or not? Because I don't know if people who signed up for that expansion pass knew they weren't getting a raid. They didn't know what they were getting.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. What I wanted to get into, which is why I mentioned Prison of Elders, was we're all sitting here saying, well, I really like the raid, and it's dynamic, and I love the 6-player stuff. We don't know a ton about Prison of Elders, other than it's 3-player, right? I think it's 3-player.
Yeah, it's a 3-player
cooperative.
And
so that is one big
activity.
difference.
So you're not getting in without a high-level character.
That's right. So it's similar to the raid. Okay, you're going to get gear. You're going to get rewards. We know that. What we don't know is how dynamic this thing is, right? I mean, who's to say it is not as dynamic as a raid? Yeah. I do read between the lines and think that, but meaning, to your point, let's not assume, right, that it's not as good. We don't know what's there yet. I just think that's important in this, right?
They're definitely describing it as variety, replayability, and skill. And, of course, we want to read between the lines, but
here's a very quick silver lining. If you can win the type of rewards that you would normally have to get out of a raid, now you only need 3 people to do it. Yeah. That's kind of interesting.
So here's the thing, and the reason that I think they went with a raidless piece of DLC, which I want to talk more about, but only 15% of daily active players have beaten the raid. 15%. So that's the audience that they would be serving, and that's probably their hardcore audience.
And you and I made this point at the last video discussion we had about this. The raid didn't necessarily save the last expansion. It did not.
Correct.
Like, please, if you're sitting there going, well, it's a super bummer, it is a bummer, but the Dark Below had a lot of problems, and it still had a good raid, and that didn't redeem it in a lot of our eyes. It did not.
Yeah, and that's the point I'm getting at. Like, I liked Crota's End, okay? Like, was super excited to play it. I liked the epic drop and all this. However, I play Vault of Glass more. Now, granted, I'm chasing Fatebringers, we all know is the ongoing long theme of this show. But meaning, I play a ton of the other stuff, and it's a really good point. If this mode's a lot of fun, I mean, again, you can get rewards with only 3 people. It could be a lot of fun that maybe you'll play it more than you played raids. But, I do like how complex raids are. I think that's what people are bummed about. They feel like they're getting less.
Well, and I hope, to your point, or at least this is what I'm pulling from your point, is that if they can come up with the kind of activities that would work in the raid, but with only 3 people, that to me says a lot. Like, this almost becomes to me sort of a bridge between someone who wants to do a 3-man sort of mini raid and someone who wants to do the actual raid. So, not saying this is a raid, of course, because they're not even using that kind of language.
You're kind of turning this segment into the topic, which is for the next segment. And I kind of want to focus on the fact that the raid was supposed to be in this piece of DLC, and it is not.
Well, did they promise
that? It wasn't supposed to be.
There is a screen. I don't know where Forbes got it, but it's a screen, and it says House of Wolves includes a raid, 3 strike missions, et cetera, et cetera. And that's from Forbes. I don't know the original source of the
that could
image.
have been the leaked stuff that was not finalized. And
it could be, but I bet consumers think that they were getting a raid with this piece of content.
The expectation is there.
Fair.
And I think it's, to your point, Dustin, you really want to answer that question. Like, will it fail without a raid? Is that what you're asking? Like, are people going to buy it?
I'm not worried about it failing. Do you feel that the consumer was betrayed by not getting a raid with this piece of content?
I think
No,
if it wasn't
because-
promised, it's hard to make the argument.
Yeah, do your fact checking. I don't think they've ever promised this.
Yeah.
I think
True.
fine. Forbes had
Which I hate to
pulled
take
something
that
had
argument
that, but-
because it does feel like, well, as a fan of the game, you have certain expectations going in. You want to believe that, Dark Below was just a slice of what you thought you would be getting for future expansions on this thing. And honestly, they're in a weird place too because they're sort of writing this book as they go. I don't think they necessarily, or maybe the raid just didn't come together in time. But I think the bigger thing that might tie into this, and it might not, so correct me if I'm wrong, but how do you make up for that, not having the raid, right? Like, does that mean the raid that you're working on, that you're saying you're working on, is going to be offered for free to anyone who already has the expansion?
It should be, in my opinion.
Okay.
When the raid's released, should it be free? That's the question we should be attempting to answer, and I think the answer is yes.
This raid's particular, not just any raid.
House of Wolves, not any raid. The next raid that comes out, if it comes out later this year, it should be part of the House of Wolves DLC pack. It should be free. If you purchase the pack, in my opinion. What do you guys think?
I think that's...
You don't think so?
We need to do some fact checking here, right?
I have
don't
to go
know that
back
they
through
ever
a year
promised...
of promotional material.
No, I mean, it should be simple, right?
right?
Like, let's look, and it'll be in the comments pretty quickly, I think. Like, did they ever promise that raids would be part of DLC?
It has to be a
activity?
vidoc
No.
or a Bungie post or some
I don't-
substantial evidence where Bungie said that there will be a raid.
Yeah.
I'm kind of
No, I
on
don't think they
Destin's
did.
side on this, though, because I think the bigger disappointment is if we have to pay for that raid. I do think there is a big disappointment, even bigger disappointment that comes with that, because for a lot of us, that raid should, probably was going to be included.
But
in
that's
this
how
thing.
you value it, and we don't know what Prison of Elders is yet, right? And
And that's fair to leave that open.
I
Well,
mean,
let me
raids
say-
can be very frustrating too. It's like, honestly, I like Crota's End. I don't know. It wasn't dynamic enough versus Vault of Glass for me. That,
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
Maybe I'll enjoy, Prison of Elders more. Meaning you're assuming the value is in the raid. That's how you perceive it. Really, you guys sound to me like you put all the value in the raid.
So I'm trying to take the stance of the average consumer and all the people that messaged me saying, no raid, I'm out. I'm done. Destin, what do you think about this? And honestly, I'm not too concerned about it. I've run through 2 raids. I'm really excited about the story content that's going to be included. I'm really excited to see what these new strikes are going to be about. I'm really excited about Prison of Elders. It's just kind of an irksome thing to hear that they took the raid out. I'm just kind of like, that's a strange decision.
If
But
they
then you
took
look
the
at the statistics. And I looked again 2 days ago. Somebody was saying only 18% of people finish a raid ever.
Endgame content is definitely designed for a very hardcore user base, and right now, and we've talked about this on the show before, at least the episodes I've been here, is just that the bridge between getting to the raid and doing something else. Like basically, there's a huge gap between what you consider Destiny from when you start and when you get to the raid.
Yeah.
And there isn't something in between that's guiding that. And I don't think this might necessarily be it, because at the same time, it's still an endgame activity. I think they need something like this a little sooner.
And those story missions are like level 30 story missions. So it's still
this is
endgame
still
content.
Endgame content, all for people who have maxed out, essentially.
But no raid. I think if the story is excellent, this could bring people in.
I don't know. Excellent might not be a realistic expectation these days. I have to be honest, just considering where
The
Destiny's
track
story
record.
has been. And
They've
the track
hired a
record
Guild
right
Wars
now.
2 writer. They've hired writers that have a good track record. Let's see what they come up with.
I don't think that's going to make up for it. I mean, the reason we play Destiny is not to watch the cutscenes. Okay, eventually you want to skip them, no matter how good they are.
Yeah.
So it's going to come and go. Maybe you enjoy those 3 or 4 story missions, whatever it was going to be.
I like how my character looks in those cutscenes.
Yeah, they look awesome, exactly. But
I
you
do
get
wanna
over
skip
that, is
them,
my
though.
point. The reason
Yeah.
you were playing is for the rewards, and
Correct.
that's why for me, if there's something in these new modes that has that. Well, if I can collaborate with another 2 people to take down an enemy, and it's dynamic enough, the world piece is dynamic. I mean, that could be a lot of fun. But that's the problem, right? We're all assuming that it's like the firefight type experience, where it's going to be wave after wave. We don't know exactly yet.
Well,
And
that
so
has
let's
been
move-
the assumption about that stuff too. So
Yeah,
let's move
let's
over
move on
then
to
to